again guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are going to be taking a look at FS Realistic Pro. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with FS Realistic. The app has been around now for quite some time in Microsoft Flight Simulator, and personally I always felt it was quite a nice enhancement to the sim, adding various sounds and a couple of camera effects there as well. That being said, up until now FS Realistic within Microsoft Flight Simulator has been left somewhat wanting compared to its X-Plane counterpart. I gather that previously the Microsoft Flight Simulator SDK didn't allow for third parties to manipulate the camera. That seems to have now changed though, and FS Realistic Pro gives us not only the excellent sound options that we've seen previously with the app, but now also a whole host of camera effects for the sim. I will say that I do think it's a little bit disappointing that we're still having to purchase third-party apps to achieve such effects. Ideally, of course, with Microsoft Flight Simulator being a modern sim, you'd really hope that at this point we have those sorts of effects as standard. Nonetheless, FS Realistic Pro does a really nice job of filling the gaps, and again we're going to be taking a look at the program today. We're currently on the ground at Reno's Stead Airport, and we are in the L39. Not really flown the jet yet on the channel, so I thought we'd take something out that's a little bit different. We'll first take a very brief look at the app itself, we'll look at the functionality there, and then we're going to be taking a quick lap around the area. We'll throw the aircraft around a bit, and hopefully give you a good feel with a side-by-side comparison between FS Realistic Pro and the default sim. As always guys, if you do enjoy the video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. As I say, we'll start by taking a quick look at the app itself before we get the aircraft up in the air. So in front of us we have the FS Realistic program main page, and here we have various options to adjust the effects. Starting with the effects page, we can choose to turn each individual effect on or off, and as you can see we have a pretty significant list of effects which we can also preview our way through. For example, we have airframe wind, auto speed brake, blade slapping is appropriate for helicopters. Some effects aren't selectable dependent on the aircraft type. Wheel brake effects, for example, we can preview that, and you can see there are now associated camera effects as well. We've got cabin ambience, clear prop, crash screaming, engine start effects as well as engine vibration effects, flaps, G-forces, gear drag, ground effect. Again, we'll preview that. Same for ground roll, you can see there a little bit of camera shake. We're not going to work our way through every single effect since there are quite an abundance of them, but we'll just preview a couple of effects here as we work our way down the list. Worth mentioning that FS Realistic does actually offer a free 7-day trial, so the easiest option here really is to just go away and try the app for yourself. Onto the profile page, here we can select our profile. We have a master switch to turn the app on and off. We can also reset to default. We can load up our own profiles, and there's also a cloud option. So if anyone else has loaded up a profile for the aircraft, we can select that. Master volume, pretty self-explanatory. We also have options in terms of auto minimize, auto start, annunciation on the start, as well as muting in the background. Currently I'm running the 7-day free trial myself, and worth noting a really nice discount from the developers if you've already purchased the previous version of the app. Lastly, the About section gives you the version number, and as you can see it gives you a whole host of options in terms of license, manual, forums and contact options. So again, overall a really nice simple UI from FS Realistic, identical really to the original FS Realistic application. As I say, we'll now start our flight. Again, we'll have the default sim on the left, FS Realistic on the right, and again all of the sounds you'll be hearing throughout the flight will be the FS Realistic sounds included with the sim. You will notice that the two viewpoints don't quite line up. It seems as though FS Realistic actually adjusts the default camera point somewhat when on the runway, but nonetheless it should give you a good feel between the sim in its default state and with FS Realistic Pro. Okay, so we're now down at the threshold for runway 32, all set and ready to go. As I say, we're going to fly a quick profile here just to go through some of the effects that FS Realistic Pro offers. We'll come off the parking brake, we can come all the way up on the throttle. And right off the bat there you can see we get some little camera vibration effects as we come up on the engine power. And just starting to see some bumps as well now as we come down the runway. So straight away you can see just how much life FS Realistic Pro actually adds into the sim. Having to feed in a little bit of right rudder here to keep the aircraft straight. Now we'll just start easing back on the stick. And we're airborne, we'll tap the brakes, the gear can come up. And we'll bring the flaps in as well. And we're going to climb straight ahead. We'll just make a very shallow climb here, build up some speed. Just wait until we come up through 400 kilometers an hour and then we'll make our turn. There's 400, we'll make our way back towards the airfield. We're going to put the aircraft into a little bit of a climbing turn here. We want to gain some altitude before we start our manoeuvring. So when not manoeuvring particularly aggressively, as is the case here, you don't notice all that much difference in terms of camera effects. And indeed a lot of the camera effects are fairly subtle, but nonetheless, again, I think they add a ton of life into the sim. Just coming up through 8,000 feet, we want at least 10,000 feet I think before we start our manoeuvres. Reno itself is at some 5,000 feet. Airfield should be just down below us, somewhere off at our 10 o'clock. Airfield just down below us now. So there's 10,000 feet. First thing we'll try is a stall. We're going to keep the power on for that as we want to build up some more altitude here for our manoeuvring later on. So we'll just pitch for around 25 degrees nose up, we'll let the speed bleed off. Just coming back through 300 kilometers an hour. We should see some visual buffeting. You'll probably notice as well there's a stick shaker effect which we'll get. I have that turned on, but it's probably not accurate of course to the real world L39. So there's 200 kilometers an hour, really having to come back on the stick now. There's the stall warning. You can see we do get a little bit of visual buffet, probably quite hard to make out in the video initially. That's building as the stall develops. And you can hear as well there the stick shaker. Keeping fully back on the stick. So again, fairly subtle effects there. You can dial them up and down as we saw during the preview there of the app itself. We'll build our speed up to around 600 kilometers an hour. We'll put the aircraft into a loop. And there's 600, so coming back on the stick. Again, just a tiny bit of shake there as we pull the manoeuvre. We'll come harder on the stick. And you'll hear now we've got the G effect. Most of the sounds should be familiar if you've already used FS Realistic. As we come over the top here, we'll really come back on the stick. Again, just inducing the stall. Now we'll just ease through the bottom of the loop here. Again, wanting to build up some speed. You can hear the sounds there do change a little bit abruptly at times. I find as well the camera does actually occasionally change quite abruptly. Seems to be as you come through certain points in the Sim's flight model. Nothing too untoward there though, overall it still works pretty well. So we're going to try and overspeed the aircraft. A little bit tricky to do here since we don't have a ton of altitude in hand. We'll level off around 15,000 feet. Now we'll let the speed build up again before we start the descent. Just chuck the aircraft around a little bit here as we build up the speed. So for normal manoeuvring, pretty much all you're seeing there is the typical sim camera effects. Mostly it's the takeoff and the landing where you're really going to notice the difference. With the prop aircraft as well, there are some effects for starting the engine, for example. You'll see more of the effects as we carry out the approach. We'll try the speed brakes. We'll try the flaps and the gear, of course, as well. So paralleling runway 32 now, more or less. I was about to try and look outside to show you, but again, of course, no track IR currently. And I think we'll just gain a little bit more altitude here before we start the descent. It's actually quite hard to overspeed the L39. We're looking for around 900 kilometers an hour to do that. So we'll get ourselves closer towards 20,000 feet. And then we'll let that speed build up again to around 400 kilometers an hour. Now we'll just go for an aileron roll here as we build up the speed. No associated sounds or changes in camera there. Might have been nice to have a few sounds there, manoeuvring the aircraft to such a degree. And looks like we've got a bit of high terrain here off the nose, so we'll point ourselves away from that again just to give us plenty of altitude in hand to build up the speed. Just going to wait until we come through 400 kilometers an hour and then we'll go for the dive. There's 400, we'll roll in. The airfield should be just off the right wing. So coming up through 600 kilometers an hour, there's 700. There's 800. You can hear the change of wind noise. And there's the buffet there as we approach the overspeed. Nice change in air volume there as well, although a little bit abrupt. Didn't quite reach the red line there on the airspeed indicator, but nonetheless you can see the effects for yourselves. Anyway, I think that just about shows off most of the functionality there in terms of flight. Again, there are more effects depending on which type of aircraft you fly. Come all the way back on the power, the airfield should be just behind us. And we'll get ourselves back to around 300 kilometers an hour. Make our way in for the landing. Just so I don't look completely inept ahead of time, we're actually going to try for a somewhat heavy landing here, just so again we can make the most of the effects. A little bit tricky to see visually there with the sun in our faces. So bring ourselves back in towards runway 32. And that's just off to our 1 o'clock. Take a stage of flap. There is a very subtle change there in air noise as well with the flaps. Take the gear down. And again, seeing a little bit more buffeting now as we start to configure the aircraft. 4 whites on the PAPI, but that's fine. Just coming back to 250 kilometers an hour. Briefly try the speed brake as well. So again, quite a bit more buffeting there with the speed brake. There should be an associated change in sound as well, but it's again fairly subtle. Go full flaps. And just letting that speed slowly bleed back. Again, looking to touch down fairly firm here just so we can see the camera effects. The L-39 is actually quite a pleasant aircraft to fly. I haven't flown it really much in the sim. Quite enjoying it so far. Doesn't have any particularly strange handling characteristics like some of the rest of the Reno bunch. Anyway, getting ourselves lined up here on final. Still a touch high here at the moment. So we'll just correct for that. Just coming back onto the PAPI. Feels like we've got a slight crosswind out from the left here. And again, a little bit tricky to see without track IR. So I'm not really going to flare the aircraft all that much, we'll just fly it onto the runway. And you can see there really nice camera effects, the aircraft bumping, shaking and rattling. Again, just making the whole thing feel much more alive. And overall I think a real improvement to the sim. So there you go guys, I hope you enjoyed our look at FS Realistic Pro and indeed our outing in the L39. Once again, I really like the FS Realistic Pro application. I think it adds a lot of life and vibrancy into the sim, certainly makes the whole aircraft feel more alive. As I mentioned during the introduction, I do think it's a little bit of a shame that we're still having to pay a third-party developer to achieve such an effect. But nonetheless, FS Realistic have done a great job with their application, and whilst it is a little bit on the pricey side if you're a first-time buyer, you get a huge discount if you previously purchased FS Realistic, which is really great to see. Most of the effects I really liked. Once again, the sounds are all pretty similar to the original FS Realistic, but the camera additions certainly add a whole lot to the sim, and as I said, while some of the camera effects can be quite subtle, personally I felt everything was done to quite an appropriate level, and again you can dial things up and down via the UI. Personally, I think FS Realistic Pro is a great addition to the sim, and once again the FS Realistic developers are offering a free 7-day trial, so I highly recommend going and checking it out for yourselves. Of course there's nothing to lose, you can see what you think and then make your decision based off that. Once again guys, I do hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider giving it a like. If you want to see more content from the channel, then please consider subscribing as well. As ever, a very big thank you to my channel members and patrons for all of your support, it's hugely appreciated. I hope that all of you are having a great day wherever you are, take really good care, and I will see you all again soon.